Hello, welcome to the Inside Knowledge for People with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson. This is episode 119, and today I want to talk about whether the low FODMAP diet is ruining your gut health. So depending on where you are with the low FODMAP diet and whether you've tried it, you may find people telling you this is a terrible diet and it's going to be ruining your gut health. Now, there is some truth to that, and I want to unpack how the FODMAP diet affects your gut. As a quick reminder, the low FODMAP diet is a dietary intervention that has been developed for people with IBS, and it removes highly fermentable fibres from your diet for a set period of time, and then you reintroduce them. It's a special process that you go through. Most people, they try to cut a few foods out and then don't get to the reintroduction stage. So they're using it to manage symptoms, but not as the dietary intervention was created. So we don't get to that stage where we're getting back to a more broad diet. So there's 5 reasons, I think, why the low FODMAP diet isn't good for your gut. But I really want to preface this whole episode by saying this is a very well researched and tested dietary process. And it is a fantastic way to help identify food intolerances in many people. It is not the first thing I would do if you've just been diagnosed with IBS. I would much rather people start with looking at your overall lifestyle, looking at your diet to make sure you're not having too much alcohol, caffeine, that you are having some exercise. Are you sleeping okay? Like, there are some basic things you can do first. If you want a summary or workbook to work through all of those, go to the show notes. I've got free 5 non-food strategies to help you with IBS. So start there. But if you're at the stage where you're looking at your diet and looking to see if there is a particular food that is maybe triggering these type of symptoms in you, then it's a really good way to start. Now, it doesn't help everybody. It's about 3 in 4 people. So around 75% of people will have some kind of improvement following this process. But it is tricky to do on your own. It's really tough. And I'm going to spend a few weeks over the next month in this podcast really talking about the low FODMAP diet and trying to give you a bit more guidance and a bit more support for when you're doing it by yourself, because what I hear from people is it's really complicated. So I'm going to go through a couple of reasons why long-term FODMAP isn't good for you. And then I'll finish up with some advice on how to do it safely and how to make the most of this process so that you are getting the most out of it. If you're going to put some effort into changing your diet, we want to make sure that we're getting the data out that makes it worthwhile. The restriction phase of the low FODMAP diet was designed to be followed for 2 to 6 weeks. So you only cut out these variety of foods for, just over a month. And then you should start really reintroducing them and starting to eat the higher fibre foods and test whether they are creating reactions for you. So where people get trapped and stuck on this restriction phase for a long time, or some of the issues with that are around the restriction of the fibres. So the first thing I want to mention is why the low FODMAP diet is not good for your gut long term is that you're restricting your access of your gut bacteria to prebiotics. Prebiotics are the food that the gut bacteria like the most. These are really high in foods such as onions, garlic, whole grains like wheat, chickpeas and lentils, a lot of vegetables and fruits as well. And these are particularly accessible food sources for our good gut bacteria. Now, if you're someone who has SIBO, you may be restricting these on purpose, thinking that you can control the SIBO symptoms and you can control the overgrowth of the bacteria by limiting their access to fibre. Now, this doesn't work long term because if you have SIBO, the only way you will get rid of it is by treating the SIBO, and that whether that's antibiotics or antimicrobial supplements or things that are killing off the bacteria, as well as changing your lifestyle or changing your digestion so that you don't get a relapse once you've done the kill phase. All right. And you may need multiple kill phases as well, unfortunately. So if you have SIBO, some people are long-term restricting FODMAPs with the idea that they are controlling the overgrowth. Now, this doesn't work. You can't control SIBO through the diet. For people with IBS, Again, you may be trying to go low FODMAP long term in order to control your symptoms, because every time you eat onions, you're getting a reaction. And sometimes people just identify this and through the careful reintroduction process, which is fair enough. If onions are your issue and your trigger, you don't have to eat them. But it's very rare that you will react to all the FODMAP groups. And this is the problem that people get stuck on, is it's unlikely that all of the high FODMAP foods are your particular trigger. And unless you go through this careful reintroduction process, you won't know which ones you need to avoid and which ones you can tolerate. Right? So the careful reintroduction process goes something like this. You take one food from each FODMAP group, and one at a time, you very slowly start eating a very small amount of this food. And then you increase the amount the next day. And then on the third day, you have a good sized portion. So for example, with milk on the last day, you're testing lactose, you're having a good glass of lactose containing milk. And that will tell you whether you have a reaction to lactose or not. But we don't jump straight in on the day 3 portion, because if you are going to have a reaction, we want to know about that at a small dose. We don't want to go straight in and have a huge dose of it, because that could create digestive chaos. That's the reintroduction process. Now, unless you've been through that, you might be avoiding all the FODMAPs and staying low FODMAP and avoiding all onions, garlic, wheat, dairy. Maybe you don't have any nuts and seeds. Maybe you avoid all fruits. Like, these are really common restrictions in people I work with, because everything feels quite scary. And that is what I hear from my clients a lot, is high FODMAP has been kind of demonized and you're really scared of them. And I totally understand why, because the symptoms that you've been getting are terrible, and maybe you don't even have control of them right now, but it feels like something you can do to try and limit the risk. And so you stay low FODMAP for as long as you can. Now, going back to the reason why this is a problem, if you're limiting all these prebiotic foods, then what you're doing is limiting the growth of the good bacteria in your large intestine. The bacteria in the large intestine are really important for our healthy immune function. They help to regulate our bowel movements. They set the acid levels in the gut as well. So you look through the research around the low FODMAP diet, there is not that much research on long-term restrictions of FODMAPs. Most of them are looking at 4 weeks, potentially 8 weeks, but they don't look at what happens in the gut when you are following a low FODMAP diet for 5 months. What about a year? What we do see is from the short-term studies that follow people for around 4 weeks is that there's a reduction in bifidobacteria. These are a type of bacteria that are really helpful. They create something called short-chain fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory, fuel for the colon cells, really healthy byproducts of bacterial metabolism in the gut. When people follow the low FODMAP diet for 4 weeks, it's been shown that these particular type of bacteria are lower compared to controls, people who didn't follow the diet. Okay. They have done some studies as well showing that people who followed the low FODMAP diet and took probiotic, which contains bifidobacterium species, had higher levels of the bifidobacteria at the end of the 4 weeks. So this is a potential workaround. So whilst you are cutting the prebiotic foods, is that you take the additional probiotics alongside of it. So that's one particular option that some people find okay. Now, there are many strains of probiotics and many multi-strain products, but you need to be quite careful because some particular probiotics will actually make your SIBO worse. They may make your symptoms worse. So I don't always recommend taking probiotics unless you really know what kind of strain you need, and you've really researched and thought about it quite a bit. Another thing that people might find helpful is to take PHGG, that's partially hydrolyzed guar gum. It's a prebiotic and you can take it, it's low FODMAP, so it fits within the restriction phase and it's okay to take alongside SIBO treatment, for example. And in fact, sometimes it actually makes the SIBO treatment even better. But that is another option, is to try and take probiotics alongside it or take a special prebiotic that is low FODMAP and see if you can protect your strains of these bifidobacterium, because we don't want these to be reduced. Now, if we know that they are clinically significantly reduced in 4 weeks, what we don't know is what happens if you follow that for 4 months or even for years. So that's one particular change, that you get a drop in these good bacteria. The second reason not to follow the low FODMAP diet long term is more about what happens when some of the good species go down, is that some of the what we call pathobionts go up. So these are bacteria that might sit okay in the gut as part of the community, but once they get a chance to take over and start to reassert their muscles and take over the space, they can lead to symptoms. So one particular strain where research has found that it can increase over the course of doing the low FODMAP diet is Bilophila wadsworthia. This uses sulfate and seems to thrive on a diet that's high in animal proteins and fats and low fibre. So think about what you're doing on the low FODMAP diet is you're cutting out quite a lot of fibre. You may then start to rely on protein from animal sources and more fats to give you energy, which makes sense. You need to keep up your energy and keep eating. And so you're going to focus more on those foods. But this particular microbe seems to really thrive on a high protein, low fiber diet, and it creates sulfurous gas, and then that can create very smelly farts, very uncomfortable cramps, pain, and a lot of the sort of symptoms that you're trying to avoid. These microbes that love sulfur and also produce hydrogen sulfide gas, particularly Bilophila wadsworthia, but also other microbes that are similar, they do not survive well in a high fibre environment. When you're eating high fibre with a lot of carbohydrate fermentation and metabolism by your good gut bacteria, then these microbes will die because they don't like an acidic environment. So one of the changes when you reduce fermentable fibres is you get a higher fecal pH. So that's the pH level. We want it to be low. We want it to be acidic because that is the good environment for the good bacteria. If you are eating no fermentable good fibres, which is basically low FODMAP long term, then there is a chance that these more undesirable microbes will take over and start producing more of their gases, which could actually exacerbate your symptoms even more. So we need to go quite carefully with the reintroduction. But if you've got hydrogen sulfide dominant SIBO, or if you have got very smelly, eggy gas and a lot of pain, you're clearing a room every time you go to the toilet, then what you need is more fibre. These bugs do not survive well in a high fibre environment. So when we're restricting FODMAPs long term, you are limiting the food sources for the good bacteria. Okay, right. The third reason why you shouldn't be long term on the low FODMAP diet is that it just reduces the amount of gut microbial diversity. And that is sort of linked to the previous point about changes in the gut environment, in the acidic content, but also once I hesitate to call them bad bacteria, but ultimately, to simplify things, let's just do that. So the bad bacteria, once they start getting a hold, often the good ones, the diversity will drop because your diet diversity is dropped. So when you eat less different types of fibre, then you're only going to be feeding selective types of microbes. So the more types of fibre and different types of plant-based foods we can eat, which includes grains, nuts and seeds, pulses and legumes, that's lentils and chickpeas, black beans, broad beans, all of those, as well as lots of fruits and vegetables, then we are feeding a diverse community of microbes. And that is what is well associated with good health. So that's one of the risks of a long-term FODMAP restriction. The other restrictions, the last 2 points I wanted to make, are just around overall food restrictions long term, which, generally we know is not great. Firstly, you may be reducing your overall nutrient intake. So people who follow long-term low FODMAP diet may be restricting dairy, so low in calcium, and you might not be replacing that with calcium fortified foods, for example, like plant-based milks, because you're worried about oat milk, you're worried about almond milk, so many things that might stop you eating fortified calcium-based foods. Then also you could be low in zinc, iron, B12, magnesium, other B vitamins. These have been linked in some studies showing that people who are following an IBS restricted diet, it wasn't specifically about the FODMAP diet, but people who follow a restrictive diet to manage their IBS are often low in those key nutrients. So that has been shown in a few studies, that there is a reduced intake, but also reduced serum blood levels of some of these key nutrients. So you could be just cutting out things unnecessarily. And then the final point I wanted to make just about restriction long term is about your increase in fear of the foods. The longer you go without eating something like garlic, probably the more scared of it you will be. And again, totally understandable. Our brain is making these very clear connections between a terrible experience of eating something with garlic in it and then the food. And so, of course, you're going to be naturally nervous to eat it. The longer that anxiety about the food stays in your brain and it feels like a danger, something you mustn't do, the more it feels like a big leap to get to the point where you can eat it again. And this kind of coaching is exactly what I do with my clients. I'm really working on how to introduce the foods and how to do it in a way that makes you feel safe, because some of it's more about the mental part of getting to the stage where you feel able to put this food in your mouth that has felt completely dangerous for so long. Right, so food fear is definitely a downside of long-term diet restriction. And that, again, the more we restrict, the less variety that you have in your diet, the more rigid your thinking can become, and the more kind of obsessive you may become about food. The more you might think about it, the more food rules you have. So it can be really challenging to break out of the thought patterns around food and allow yourself to get to the point where you actually can retest. Now, I understand if you're in a place where you've restricted a lot of FODMAPs for a long time and you still don't feel good, you don't really want to start retesting them because you think, well, I haven't got a good baseline. How will I know if these foods are bad for me or good for me because I'm already feeling terrible? So if I don't feel good, how will I know if it's making things worse? And one of the things I say to my clients quite a bit is, if you can eat this food, there's benefit to eating most of these prebiotic foods, right? They are good for you. A lot of the coaching I do with people is explaining to them why they even need these foods. Like, what is the benefit of adding in a raspberry? Why is this a good food for us? What are the antioxidants doing? How is it helping your brain health, your skin health, your mood? Like, let's try and remember why we need this diversity. So adding those foods back in again, it gives you something. It's not just a risk. There's a benefit to be had from adding the food in. And if you can tolerate it without your symptoms becoming excessively worse, then you may as well be eating it, even if you're not at that good baseline. All right? If you eat something and you get a dramatic, terrible reaction, sure, don't eat that thing again. But it's unlikely to be all the FODMAP groups. That's what I said at the beginning. And I'm just coming back to remind you, it's unlikely that you will react to all of them. If you're looking for a way to start the low FODMAP diet, but you're scared it's going to be damaging your gut health, just remember that it is completely safe to do the low FODMAP process, how it was designed, which is a short restriction phase and then a careful reintroduction. This is not damaging your gut health long term. And what it might do is give you freedom to be able to enjoy many more foods. So I do recommend taking yourself through this process or working with somebody who knows how to do it so you can do it safely and carefully. But there's three things I think will really help make the most of it so you know what you're doing. The first one is to really focus on high fibre, low FODMAP foods. Make sure that you are still including foods that are low FODMAP but do contain a variety of fibres. Otherwise, you could feel some of the ill effects of this diet. So we want to make sure that you're still eating a portion of raspberries regularly, some blueberries. You're having little bits of broccoli. You can have things like carrots, parsnips, green beans. There is a lot of variety you can eat, but we just need to work on it. So keep up the variety in nutrients, keep up the variety in fibre. The low FODMAP diet should not be something that causes you to lose weight. And if you are, then you need to have a think about what you're eating. High protein foods like chicken, fish, eggs, these are all okay on the low FODMAP diet. So if you're following this diet, you don't need to skimp on your protein, which will help to keep you a bit fuller. And it's not going to be forever, but we're just going to try and balance it with as many low FODMAP fruits and veg as possible. Keep up your variety, and also focusing on energy intake. Keep the gut moving. Do not skip meals. Try and eat 3 meals a day because that helps to regulate your digestion. Then the last thing to focus on is really planning the process to get off the diet. Next week, I will focus a bit more on how to do the FODMAP reintroduction process and giving you some examples of how you can do that, how to go about creating a baseline, making sure that you know what you're doing, and I'll go through all of that next week. If you have any questions about the low FODMAP diet, you can always email me. It's info@goodnessme-nutrition.com. And I will include some of your questions in this FODMAP series. And if you want some help for yourself around the FODMAP diet, about IBS and SIBO symptoms in general, then you can find my book on Amazon. It's called Inside Knowledge for People with IBS and SIBO. And it's on Amazon wherever you are in the world. Although sadly not in South Africa, I've understood. But in most countries in the world, you can download it as a Kindle book or as paperback. You can buy it as well. And that is available now. And we'll give you some careful reintroduction tips. It will give you FODMAP overview, analysis of the dairy-free, gluten-free diets for IBS, as well as loads of symptom management tips. So do check that out. If you want some individualized help, you can also get in touch with me and talk about what you need help with and whether it's a good fit for us to work together. So go to the show notes, you can book a call with me. Thanks very much for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge podcast. Better digestion for everyone.